The bullet tore through Stella Crawford's shoulder on a Tuesday afternoon in 1878. But it was the words her fiancé spoke 3 days later that shattered something far deeper inside her chest. Monticello, Utah stretched across the high desert plateau, like a handful of weathered buildings clinging to hope and stubbornness in equal measure. The town had grown from nothing more than a Mormon settlement, and now it served as a stopping point for cattle drives heading north and miners searching for silver in the La Salle Mountains. Stella had lived here for 2 years, working as a seamstress in Mrs. Henderson's dress shop, saving every penny for the wedding that would never happen now. The robbery had been swift and brutal. 3 men with bandanas covering their faces had stormed into the First National Bank while Stella stood at the counter, depositing the week's earnings from the dress shop. When the youngest robber's gun went off, nobody could say if it was intentional or an accident born of nerves and adrenaline. The bullet found Stella's left shoulder, spinning her backward into the wall where she crumpled like one of the fabric dolls she sometimes made for the children in town. Dr. Brennan had done his best. He extracted the bullet, stitched the wound, and told her she would live. But the damage went beyond flesh and bone. Her left arm hung useless at her side, the nerves too damaged to repair with the limited medical knowledge available in 1878. She could barely lift it, could not grip anything with her left hand, could not raise her arm above her waist. Thomas Whitmore, her fiancé of 8 months, had visited her in the boarding house where she recovered. He stood near the door, hat in his hands, looking everywhere except at her face. "I cannot marry you now, Stella," he said, his voice tight and formal. "A man needs a proper wife. Someone who can tend a house, raise children, help with the work. You are too broken to be fixed. I am sorry." He left the ring on her bedside table and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the stairs like the final nails in a coffin. That had been 4 weeks ago. Now, Stella sat in the back room of the dress shop, attempting to thread a needle with her right hand while her left lay motionless in her lap. Mrs. Henderson had kept her on out of charity more than necessity, giving her simple tasks that required only one hand. But Stella could see the pity in everyone's eyes, could hear the whispers that followed her down Main Street, too broken to be fixed. The words played in her mind like a stuck music box, the same phrase over and over until she wanted to scream. The autumn sun hung low over the eastern mountains when Mitchell Young rode into Monticello on a buckskin gelding that had seen better days. Dust covered his duster coat, and his dark hair needed cutting, falling past his collar in waves that spoke of months on the trail. He had the lean, weathered look of a man who lived outdoors more than in, with lines around his green eyes that came from squinting into endless horizons. He was 26 years old, and had spent the last 8 years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana, saving his money with the dream of buying his own ranch. The dream had finally materialized in the form of 200 acres north of Monticello, complete with a small cabin, a barn that needed substantial repairs, and access to good water from a creek that ran year-round. He had paid cash for it 2 weeks ago, and was now in town to purchase supplies and hire help for the coming winter. Mitchell tied his horse outside the general store and stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, his boots making hollow sounds against the planks. The town was smaller than he had expected, but it had the essentials: a general store, a saloon, a church, a dress shop, a blacksmith, and a hotel. He could see the bank at the end of the street, still bearing a fresh coat of paint over what looked like bullet holes in the doorframe. He spent an hour in the general store, arranging for lumber, nails, wire, and provisions to be delivered to his ranch. The store owner, a man named Prout with mutton chop whiskers and a calculating eye, tallied up the costs with obvious pleasure. "You will need help getting that barn repaired before the snow comes," Prout said, scratching figures into his ledger. "Winter hits hard up here in the mountains. We can get 3 feet of snow in a single storm." "I am looking for someone reliable," Mitchell said. "Know anyone who needs work?" Prout considered. "Most of the able-bodied men are working the ranches or up in the mines, but I will put the word out." Mitchell nodded his thanks and left the store, stepping into the late afternoon light. His stomach reminded him that he had not eaten since morning, so he headed toward the small restaurant he had spotted next to the hotel. That was when he saw her. She stood outside the dress shop, struggling to carry a bolt of fabric that kept slipping from her grip. Her right arm strained with the weight while her left hung motionless at her side. She wore a simple gray dress that had been mended in several places, and her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun that revealed the fine bones of her face. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, but there was something in her expression that spoke of recent pain, a tightness around her mouth and eyes that came from swallowing down hurt. The fabric bolt slipped again, and she made a frustrated sound, trying to adjust her grip. Mitchell moved without thinking, crossing the street in long strides. "Let me help you with that, miss." She looked up, startled, and he found himself caught by her eyes. They were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight, amber and gold with flecks of darker brown. For a moment she seemed ready to refuse, pride warring with practicality across her features. Then she stepped back slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It goes inside to the back room." Mitchell lifted the bolt easily, following her into the dress shop. The interior smelled of fabric and lavender sachets, with bolts of cloth lining the walls in a rainbow of colors. A woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with obvious interest. "In here," Stella said, leading him to a back room filled with a cutting table, a sewing machine, and baskets of thread and buttons. He set the fabric where she indicated, then straightened. "You are new in town," she said. It was not a question. "Just bought the old Harrison place north of here," Mitchell replied. "Mitchell Young, Stella Crawford." She did not offer her hand, and he understood why when he saw how her left arm remained completely still. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Crawford." He touched the brim of his hat. "Hope the ranch name is not an omen. I would prefer it not be a place people are running from." A ghost of a smile crossed her face, there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. Mr. Harrison moved to Denver to live with his daughter. He was 83 and tired of fighting the winters. "Cannot say I blame him." Mitchell found himself reluctant to leave, though he could not have explained why. There was something about her that called to him, something in the way she held herself with careful dignity despite whatever had happened to her arm. "Well, I should let you get back to your work. Thank you for your help, Mr. Young." He left the shop and headed to the restaurant, but his mind kept returning to the woman with the amber eyes and the injured arm. Over the next 2 weeks, Mitchell found himself in town more often than necessary. He told himself it was because of the ranch work, the need to order additional supplies or check on deliveries. But the truth was that he hoped to see Stella Crawford again. He learned her story in pieces, gathered from casual conversations with townspeople who were happy to gossip with a newcomer. The bank robbery, the bullet, the shattered nerves in her arm, the fiancé who had abandoned her because she could no longer fulfill his requirements for a proper wife. That last part made anger burn in Mitchell's chest, hot and fierce. What kind of man walked away from a woman he claimed to love because of an injury beyond her control? He saw Stella occasionally, always from a distance. She walked to work each morning and home each evening to the boarding house where she rented a room. She kept her head up but her eyes down, avoiding prolonged contact with anyone, She moved through the town like a ghost, present, but not quite part of the living world around her. Mitchell wanted to speak with her again, but could not find a natural reason to approach her. Then fate intervened in the form of a torn shirt. He had caught the sleeve on a nail while repairing the barn, ripping a long gash through the fabric. Rather than attempt to mend it himself with his clumsy stitching, he decided to take it to the dress shop. Stella was alone in the shop when he entered, Mrs. Henderson having gone to lunch. She looked up from the garment she was attempting to pin with her one functional hand, and recognition flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Young, Miss Crawford, I have a repair job if you are taking them." He held up the shirt. "Had an argument with a nail. The nail won." She set aside her work and came to examine the tear. Her fingers traced the damage with a professional eye. "I can mend this. It will take a day. No rush." He paused, then decided to take a chance. "How are you settling in? Must be a change from wherever you came from before Monticello." She glanced at him, surprise evident. Most people in town either pretended her injury did not exist or stared at it with uncomfortable pity. He did neither, simply meeting her eyes with genuine interest. "I came from Salt Lake City 2 years ago," she said slowly. "My parents died in a fire and I had no other family. Mrs. Henderson is a distant cousin. She offered me work and a place to start over. I am sorry about your parents. Thank you." She folded his shirt carefully. "What brought you to Monticello? It is not exactly a thriving metropolis." "I've been trailing cattle for 8 years, saved enough to buy my own place, wanted somewhere quiet with good land and clean water." He leaned against the counter. "The Harrison Ranch fit the description. You plan to run cattle, eventually." "Right now I am focused on making the cabin livable and getting the barn repaired before winter. It is more work than I anticipated for one person." She nodded, and something crossed her face, too quick for him to identify. Then Mrs. Henderson returned, bustling in with packages and chattering about the gossip she had heard at lunch. Mitchell paid for the repair and left, but not before catching Stella's eye one more time. 2 days later, she appeared at his ranch. Mitchell was on the barn roof, hammering new shingles into place, when he heard the sound of a wagon approaching. He looked up to see a small cart driven by Stella Crawford, her good hand holding the reins with competent ease. He climbed down the ladder as she pulled the horse to a stop near the cabin. "Miss Crawford, this is a surprise." She set the brake and climbed down, moving carefully to compensate for her useless arm. "I brought your shirt. Mrs. Henderson said you might need it sooner rather than later." He could see the mended sleeve, the stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. "You did not need to come all the way out here. I would have collected it when I was next in town." "I know." She looked around at the ranch, taking in the half-repaired barn, the neat cabin, the corrals that needed mending. "You said you needed help with the work." Mitchell went still. "I did. I can cook, clean, do laundry. I can manage most household tasks with one hand if I am given time to figure out the methods." Her voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the tension underneath. "I cannot pay much, but Mrs. Henderson says I am competent at what I do." He studied her, understanding what it must have cost her to come here. "You are offering to work for me?" "Yes. Mrs. Henderson does not have enough work to keep me busy full-time. I need additional income." She met his eyes directly. "I am aware of my limitations, Mr. Young. But I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." Mitchell considered. The truth was, he did need help. He had been eating his own terrible cooking for weeks and the cabin was a bachelor's disaster. But more than that, he wanted her here. Wanted to see her every day, wanted to learn what made her smile, wanted to be the person who proved to her that she was not too broken for anything. "The job is yours if you want it," he said. "But I insist on paying you properly." Same wage I would pay anyone else. Suspicion flickered across her face. You do not need to offer charity, Mr. Young. It is not charity, it is fair pay for fair work. He gestured toward the cabin. Would you like to see where you would be working? She followed him inside, and he tried to see the space through her eyes. The cabin was solid, built of good timber with a stone fireplace and windows that let in ample light. But it was clearly a man's space, with minimal furniture and no decorative touches. The kitchen area held a cast iron stove, a table, and shelves for supplies. A door led to the single bedroom which he had claimed, though he supposed he could sleep in the barn if propriety demanded. You would need to stay in town, she said, reading his thoughts. I cannot live out here unchaperoned. It would ruin what little reputation I have left. Of course. I would never suggest otherwise. I was thinking you could come out during the day, perhaps 3 or 4 times a week to start. I can provide the cart and horse for your travel. She walked around the space, trailing her good hand over the table, the stove, the shelves. I can do this, she said, more to herself than to him. I can make this work. Then we have an agreement. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw something other than pain in her eyes. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. We have an agreement, Mr. Young. Stella began working at the ranch 3 days a week. She arrived each morning around 8 and stayed until late afternoon, cooking meals that Mitchell could reheat, doing laundry, cleaning the cabin, and organizing his supplies with an efficiency that impressed him. She developed systems to compensate for her injured arm, using her body weight to steady pots while she stirred, pinning fabric between her knees to fold it, propping baskets against her hip to carry them. Mitchell made a point of being nearby while she worked, not to supervise but simply to be available if she needed assistance with anything requiring 2 hands. He noticed that she never asked for help unless absolutely necessary, her pride still too tender to allow for easy requests. So he learned to anticipate, appearing at the right moment to lift a heavy pot or reach something from a high shelf, then disappearing again before she could feel embarrassed. They talked while they worked, conversations that started out careful and formal but gradually became more natural. He told her about his years on cattle drives, the storms and stampedes, the endless days under the vast sky. She told him about learning to sew from her mother, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from mere fabric and thread. I used to make wedding dresses, she said one afternoon while kneading bread dough with her good hand, her injured arm braced against the table to provide stability. Before the accident, Mrs. Henderson would do the initial cutting and pinning, and I would do the detailed work, the beading and lace and embroidery. You cannot do that anymore, Mitchell asked, pausing in his work of repairing a saddle. Not to the standard required. The fine work needs 2 steady hands. She punched down the dough with more force than necessary. Now I do alterations and simple repairs, things that do not require precision. That must be hard, giving up something you loved. She looked at him, surprised again by his understanding. Everyone else tells me I should be grateful I can still sew it all. You can be grateful and still grieve what you lost. The two are not mutually exclusive. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the careful walls she maintained. No one else seems to understand that. Then they are not paying attention. He set down the saddle. You want to know what I see when I look at you, Miss Crawford? She went still, her hand resting on the dough. What? I see someone who got shot in a bank robbery through no fault of her own, who survived an injury that would have sent other people to bed for months, who learned to function with one arm in a world designed for 2, who gets up every morning and faces a town full of people who treat her like she is fragile or pitiable, and who does it with her head held high. He crossed to where she stood. That is not broken. That is strength. Tears gathered in her eyes, bright and sudden. You do not know what you are talking about. Do I not? He kept his voice gentle. I have seen broken, Stella. I have seen men give up after far less. You have not given up. You have just been told a lie so many times that you started to believe it. A single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. She brushed it away impatiently with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of flour across her face. Stop being kind to me. I do not know how to handle it. Then I guess you will have to learn. He picked up a towel and carefully wiped the flour from her cheek, the gesture achingly tender. Because I do not plan to stop. She stared at him, something fierce and fragile warring in her expression. Then she turned back to the bread dough, but he could see the way her hand trembled slightly as she shaped it into loaves. The first snow came in early November, turning the world white and hushed. Stella arrived at the ranch that morning bundled in a wool coat that had seen better years, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Mitchell had the cabin warm, the fire blazing in the hearth. He had also made coffee, though it was terrible as usual, too strong and bitter. You need to let me teach you to make proper coffee, Stella said, laughing at his offended expression when she took a sip. What is wrong with my coffee? It tastes like mud mixed with regret. That is harsh. That is honest. She set about making a fresh pot, moving around the kitchen with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. You are a rancher, not a cook. There is no shame in it. He watched her work, admiring the economical way she moved, wasting no motion. Over the past weeks, she had filled out slightly, her face less gaunt, as if the regular meals and physical work agreed with her. She smiled more often now, though still cautiously, as if afraid the expression might be taken away. Tell me something, he said, leaning against the doorframe. What did you want to be when you were young? Before you became a seamstress, she paused, considering. I wanted to be a teacher. I loved reading, loved stories and history and geography. I thought it would be wonderful to share that with children. She shrugged with her good shoulder. But my family needed the income, and sewing paid better than teaching. You still read, when I can. Mrs. Henderson has a few books. I have some books. Not many, but you are welcome to borrow them. He gestured to a small shelf near his bed. Mostly adventure stories and some Shakespeare. Her eyes lit up, genuine excitement breaking through her usual reserve. You read Shakespeare. My mother was a school teacher before she married my father. She insisted I learn to appreciate literature even if I was going to be a cowboy. He smiled at the memory. I can still recite most of Hamlet's soliloquies if pressed. I would like to hear that someday. Consider it a promise. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Stella preparing a stew for his dinner while Mitchell mended a bridle that had cracked in the cold. Snow continued to fall outside, thick and steady, coating the world in white. The roads will be bad, Mitchell said, glancing out the window with growing concern. You should head back to town soon. But when Stella prepared to leave an hour later, it was clear that soon had been too late. The snow had intensified into a full storm, visibility reduced to a few feet. Wind howled around the cabin and drifts were already forming against the walls. Mitchell looked at the maelstrom, then at Stella's pale face. You cannot go out in that. You will freeze to death before you get halfway to town. I cannot stay here overnight. People will talk. People will talk either way. Better they gossip about your reputation than mourn your frozen body. He moved to block the door, his expression brooking no argument. You are staying here tonight. We will figure out the propriety of it tomorrow when you are alive to care about it. She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but practicality won over pride. Where will I sleep? You take the bed. I will sleep out here by the fire. Mitchell, I cannot take your bed. It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it in her voice made something warm unfurl in his chest. "You can and you will. It is not up for debate, Stella." She relented, too tired and cold to fight. He gave her one of his clean shirts to sleep in and turned his back while she changed in the bedroom, then made up a pallet for himself near the fire. The storm raged all night, wind screaming around the cabin like a living thing. Mitchell lay awake, hyper-aware of Stella's presence in the next room. He could hear her moving restlessly, could imagine her lying in his bed, her hair loose around her shoulders. He was falling in love with her. The realization settled over him with quiet certainty. Not a sudden bolt, but a gradual understanding that had been building since the first moment. He saw her struggling with that bolt of fabric. He loved her strength, her determination, the way she refused to let her injury define her. He loved her rare smiles and her sharp observations and the way she hummed softly when she cooked, but she was not ready to hear it yet. She was still healing, still learning to see herself as whole. He would wait. He was good at waiting. Morning brought clear skies and a world transformed. Snow blanketed everything in pristine white, sparkling in the sunlight like scattered diamonds. Mitchell woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, rolling over to see Stella already dressed and working at the stove. "Good morning," she said without turning around. "I hope you do not mind. I wanted to make breakfast as a thank you for not letting me die in a snowstorm. I think that was just basic human decency rather than something requiring thanks." He stood and stretched, noting the way she carefully did not watch him. "But I appreciate the gesture." They ate together, sitting at the small table while pale sunlight streamed through the windows. The cabin felt different somehow, more like a home than a bachelor's dwelling. Mitchell realized it was her presence that changed it, her small touches evident in the tidy space and the carefully prepared meal. "I need to get back to town," Stella said after they finished eating. "Mrs. Henderson will worry. I will drive you. The roads should be passable by now." The journey to town took twice as long as usual, the cart moving slowly through deep snow. They passed several ranches where people were already out clearing paths and tending to livestock. Mitchell noted the way they looked at him and Stella, curiosity evident in their expressions. When they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson rushed out, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Stella, I was so worried. When the storm hit, I hoped you had found shelter." "I stayed at Mr. Young's cabin. The storm made it impossible to travel, Mrs." Henderson's gaze flicked between them, sharp and assessing. "I see. Well, I am grateful he had the sense to keep you safe rather than send you out into that weather." "Mr. Young was a perfect gentleman," Stella said firmly. "He gave me his bed and slept by the fire. I am sure he did, Mrs." Henderson's tone suggested she was not entirely convinced, but she was too kind to push the matter. "Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted." Stella turned to Mitchell. "Thank you for everything." "My pleasure, Miss Crawford." He tipped his hat to both women and drove away, but not before seeing the speculative looks from several townspeople who had witnessed the exchange. The gossip started almost immediately. By the next day, half the town had heard that Stella Crawford had spent the night at Mitchell Young's ranch. The details grew more scandalous with each retelling, until some versions had them living together in sin while others had Mitchell ruining her virtue. Stella heard the whispers when she walked to work. She saw the way women clustered together on the street, their conversations stopping abruptly when she passed. Thomas Whitmore's mother made a point of crossing the street to avoid her, her expression full of righteous disapproval. It hurt, but not as much as Stella expected. She had already lost her reputation when Thomas abandoned her. This was just additional damage to something already broken. Mrs. Henderson, to her credit, defended her. Anyone with sense knows that girl is as proper as they come, she told anyone who would listen. Mr. Young did the right thing keeping her safe. Would you have preferred she freeze to death to preserve appearances? But not everyone was convinced. When Stella arrived at the dress shop that morning, she found a note slipped under the door. The handwriting was crude, the message cruel. Women of loose morals are not welcome here. Leave town before you corrupt our daughters. Stella stood in the cold morning air, staring at the paper in her hand. She should have been upset, should have felt devastated. Instead, she felt oddly detached, as if this was happening to someone else. "What is that?" She turned to find Mitchell standing behind her, his face concerned. He must have seen her from the street. "Nothing important." She tried to fold the note, but he gently took it from her hand. His expression darkened as he read. "Who wrote this?" "I do not know. It does not matter. It does matter." Anger vibrated in his voice, controlled but intense. "This is cruel and unfounded." "Is it?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "I am exactly what they say I am. A woman of questionable virtue who spent the night alone with a man. You were trapped by a snowstorm. We did nothing wrong. That does not matter to them." She took the note back, crumpling it in her fist. "I am already damaged goods, Mitchell. This just confirms what everyone already thought." "Stop." He stepped closer, his voice fierce. "Stop letting other people define who you are. You are not damaged. You are not goods to be appraised and found wanting. You are a person, a good person, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool. You do not understand what it is like. Being looked at like you are worth less than nothing. You are right. I do not understand, but I know what I see when I look at you, and it is someone worthy of respect and admiration and love." The word hung in the air between them, powerful and terrifying. "Mitchell," she whispered, "do not." "Do not what?" "Tell you the truth." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her cold skin. "I am in love with you, Stella. I have been for weeks. I love your strength and your courage and the way you refuse to give up even when the world tells you to. I love how you hum when you cook and the way you always arrange things by color. I love that you put up with my terrible coffee and teach me patience without even trying." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You cannot love me. I am too broken." "Then I will love you exactly as you are." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away her tears. "Broken or whole or anything in between, I will love all of you, Stella Crawford, if you will let me." She stared at him, this cowboy with green eyes and a gentle heart, who saw past her injury to the person underneath. She thought of Thomas, who had loved her only when she was perfect and useful. Mitchell loved her because of who she was, not despite her limitations. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that you will change your mind, that you will wake up one day and realize you made a mistake." "I will not." "But I understand the fear." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I am not asking you to marry me today, Stella. I am just asking you to give me a chance. Let me prove that my love is not conditional." She thought about the past months, the way he had been unfailingly kind without being condescending, helpful without making her feel helpless. He had treated her like an equal, someone valuable and whole. "All right," she said softly. "All right." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a promise more than a demand. She kissed him back with her good hand tangled in his shirt, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he smiled at her. "I should probably court you properly. Take you to dinner, bring you flowers, all of that. I would like that." She laughed, surprising herself. "Though perhaps we should be discreet. I do not think my reputation can survive much more scandal. Let them talk. I do not care what anyone thinks except you." But they were careful anyway, conducting their courtship with as much propriety as possible. Mitchell came to town every few days, taking Stella for walks, or sitting with her in the boarding house parlor under Mrs. Henderson's watchful eye. He brought her wildflowers that he picked on his ranch, bouquets of Indian paintbrush and columbine that she pressed between the pages of his Shakespeare collection. They talked for hours, sharing dreams and fears and memories. He told her about his parents, both dead now, and his younger sister who had married a banker and moved to Chicago. She told him about growing up in Salt Lake City, the fire that killed her parents, the desperate fear of being alone in the world. "You are not alone anymore," he told her one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You have me for as long as you want me." "I want you forever," she said quietly. "Is that too much to ask?" "It is exactly the right amount to ask." He proposed on a clear December day, taking her out to his ranch under the pretense of needing help with a sewing project. She knew something was different the moment she arrived. The cabin was spotless, a fire crackling merrily in the hearth. He had even made coffee, which was only slightly terrible. "You are nervous," she observed, setting down her bag. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." He took her good hand, drawing her to the center of the room. "I have something I want to ask you." Her heart began to pound. "Mitchell, I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I am 36 years old, and I have learned that life is too short to waste time when you know something is right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I love you, Stella Crawford. I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to face whatever comes, good or bad, with you by my side. Will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, then at his face, seeing nothing but love and certainty in his expression. She thought about Thomas and his conditional acceptance, his requirements for what a wife should be. Mitchell asked for nothing except herself. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with joy and relief. She held him with her good arm, her injured one pressed between them, and felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. She was not broken. She was simply changed, and this man loved her exactly as she was. They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Monticello. Mrs. Henderson helped Stella sew her wedding dress, a simple ivory gown with delicate embroidery that Stella managed to do herself through sheer determination. She wore wildflowers in her hair, and Mitchell wore his best suit with a string tie and polished boots. The whole town turned out, partly from curiosity and partly from genuine goodwill. Even Thomas Whitmore attended, though he left immediately after the ceremony, his face carefully neutral. The reception was held in the church hall, with music from a fiddle player and dancing and more food than the small group could possibly eat. Mitchell danced with his bride, holding her carefully as they swayed to the music. "Are you happy?" he murmured into her hair, deliriously. She looked up at him, her amber eyes bright. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for letting me in." He kissed her forehead. "I promise to spend every day proving that you made the right choice." "I know I did." They moved into the ranch immediately, and Stella threw herself into making the cabin a home. She sewed curtains for the windows and cushions for the chairs. She organized the kitchen with ruthless efficiency, creating systems that allowed her to cook elaborate meals with one hand. She planted a garden that would bloom in the spring, marking out beds for vegetables and herbs and flowers. Mitchell worked the ranch, building up his small herd of cattle and making endless repairs. He hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavy work, giving him room and board in the barn he had converted into living quarters. Life settled into a rhythm, hard work balanced with quiet evenings by the fire. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small intimacies of shared life. Stella learned that Mitchell talked to his horses and sang off-key when he thought no one was listening. Mitchell learned that Stella was grumpy in the mornings until she had coffee, and that she read in bed every night before sleeping. They made love with tenderness and passion, Mitchell always careful of her injured arm, Stella gradually growing confident in her own body again. He made her feel beautiful and whole, worshipping every inch of her with hands and mouth until she forgot that she had ever felt broken. Winter passed into spring, and the land exploded with life. Stella's garden flourished, rows of green pushing up through the dark earth. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows and the creek ran high with snowmelt. Mitchell's cattle thrived, sleek and healthy on the good grass. In June, Stella discovered she was pregnant. She told Mitchell over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I saw Dr. Brennan today." He confirmed it. Mitchell set down his fork, his expression stunned. "You are certain?" "Yes. He said the baby should come in late January or early February." A smile broke across his face, brilliant and joyful. He stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. "We are going to have a baby. Stella, we are going to be parents," she laughed, holding on to him. "You are happy." Happy does not begin to cover it. He set her down carefully, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I wanted but was afraid to hope for." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Stella found the limitations of one functioning arm even more frustrating as her belly grew. Mitchell hired a woman from town to help with the heavy housework, and he took over tasks that required two hands. Their son was born on a freezing February night in 1880, arriving after a long labor that left Stella exhausted but triumphant. Dr. Brennan placed the squalling infant in her arms, and she looked down at his red face and shock of dark hair with overwhelming love. "He is perfect," Mitchell whispered, perched on the edge of the bed. "You are both perfect." They named him Samuel after Stella's father. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them awake most nights but filled the cabin with life and noise. Stella learned to care for him with one hand, developing techniques for changing diapers and bathing him, and nursing him that compensated for her limitations. Mitchell was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his terrible singing voice. Stella would watch them together, her heart so full it ached, and think about how close she had come to missing all of this. 2 years later, their daughter arrived. Rose was born on a warm June morning, easier than her brother had been, with her mother's amber eyes and her father's smile. Samuel, now a toddling 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly with his chubby hands. The ranch prospered. Mitchell's herd grew to over 100 head, and he bought an additional 100 acres of land to the west. They built an addition onto the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. Stella's garden expanded year by year, providing vegetables for their table and enough extra to sell in town. They faced hardships too. A harsh winter in 1883 killed a quarter of their cattle, setting them back financially. Samuel broke his arm falling from a tree when he was 5, giving Stella her first taste of the terror that comes with having children. Rose was sick for weeks with a fever that had them both terrified she would not recover. But they faced everything together, Mitchell and Stella, united in their commitment to each other and their family. On their 10th anniversary, Mitchell gave her a new sewing machine, one of the latest treadle models that allowed her to do more complex work. She cried and kissed him, still overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "You mentioned wanting to make wedding dresses again," he said. "I thought this might help." She did start sewing wedding dresses again, working from home on commissions from brides in Monticello and surrounding towns. Her work was exquisite, intricate beading and embroidery done with patient one-handed care. She became known throughout the region, and women traveled to see her, wanting dresses made by Stella Young. The children grew. Samuel developed his father's love for ranching, trailing after Mitchell from the time he could walk. Rose showed her mother's creative bent, learning to sew and draw and paint. They added another son in 1885, Matthew, who had his father's green eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. The town that had once whispered about Stella now pointed to her as an example of perseverance. She served on the church ladies' committee and organized fundraisers for the new school. Mitchell was elected to the town council, his reputation as a fair and honest man making him a natural leader. Years passed in the way they do, marked by birthdays and holidays and the changing seasons. They celebrated victories and mourned losses. They grew older, lines deepening around their eyes, hair turning silver. But their love remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. On a warm evening in 1895, 17 years after they had first met, Stella and Mitchell sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were inside, Samuel, now a young man of 16, helping with dinner, Rose at 14 practicing piano, Matthew at 10 supposedly doing homework. "Do you ever regret it?" Stella asked quietly. "Marrying me?" Mitchell turned to look at her, surprise evident in his face. "Never." "Not once. Why would you ask that?" "I just wonder sometimes what your life would have been like if you had married someone whole, someone who could have helped more with the ranch work, who did not need so much accommodation." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "Stella Young, you listen to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You taught me what real strength looks like. You showed me that love is not about perfection but about choosing each other every single day, regardless of circumstances." "I was told I was too broken to be fixed," she said softly, "and I said I would love you exactly as you are." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "That has not changed, Stella. That will never change." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple as the sun disappeared behind the peaks. The air smelled of sage and grass and the coming night. Inside the house, she could hear their children laughing, the sounds of family life that had seemed impossible all those years ago. "I love you," she said. "I do not say it enough, but I love you with everything I am. I know." His arm came around her shoulders, holding her close. "I have always known." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from broken pieces. The ranch spread around them, a testament to hard work and determination. Their children grew strong and healthy, carrying forward the lessons their parents taught them about perseverance and unconditional love. Stella had been told she was too broken to be fixed, but Mitchell had seen the truth. She was not broken at all. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and she was loved, deeply and completely, exactly as she was. And that, in the end, was everything.